All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. If you're watching us, please subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening, please rate and review us on iTunes. And whatever you're doing, please go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis and support this program. Excited to have back today Tom Nichols. He's a professor at the U.S. Naval War College, a columnist at USA Today, and the author of this book, Our Own Worst Enemy. Tom Nichols, welcome back to the news.
It's good to be back with you, Matt. Good to see you again.
It's always great to talk with you. I want to talk about the book. I want to take some Twitter questions and then maybe finish out with some current events. But let's start with this book. It seems like winning is losing. Like America is having a lot of problems now. Liberal democracy is having problems now. And part of the problem is that we have been so successful. It's an ironic problem, right?
Yeah. The problem is that a little adversity irritates us. A lot of adversity makes us pull together. And no adversity drives us apart. And it's a kind of a strange argument because it sounds like an argument, for blood and steel and war and deprivation. And it's really not that. It's an argument, I think, for gratitude.
Yeah.
That I think the citizens of the democracies, and particularly in the United States, have become, and this isn't in the past 4 or 5 years, this is over, 30, 40 years, have become entitled, and ungrateful to the system of government they live in. And I don't mean any one government. I don't mean, Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton, but rather that the default setting now is that if I am uncomfortable, inconvenienced, or even when I suffer, real deprivation, when something terrible happens, lose a job, medical crisis, whatever it is, democracy itself is to blame.
You know what's interesting is, and I'm sure you know about this, Tom, as a professor, they say that nations that become very successful, they can't be in areas like Antarctica, right? Because it's you would have to spend so many resources just to survive. But there's also a resource curse. So like if the weather's too perfect, you're going to hang out at the beach naked, you're probably not going to become a thriving, successful nation either. And I wonder if maybe at some point we now have the same problem as a resource curse might have.
Yeah, the resource curse you can really see with countries that have abundant natural resources that can just generate money like oil, right? Or minerals right out of the ground, so that you never develop institutions, you never develop stable forms of government. You just say, you just stand there and watch money come out of the ground, and that solves all your problems in the short term. I think the bigger problem is that the high standard of living combined with peace and general affluence leads you to keep expecting more from your system of government than governments can actually provide.
Yeah.
So it's not quite the same thing as, food falling out of the trees or dollar bills, gushing, Jed Clampett hitting that oil well and money gushing out of the ground.
Yeah. Up from the ground came a bubbling. What was it?
Anyway. Up from the ground came a bubbling crude.
I do remember
the Beverly Hillbillies. People are going to turn us right off,
the
Matt.
Cement pond. Anyway, I won't go there. You make a lot of interesting. I'm sorry.
Just to finish that point, the problem is that there's this thing called hedonic adaptation, where the standard of living you're at becomes the lowest standard of living you're willing to accept.
Yes.
And then because you have developed this notion that all things come from the government, that anytime things go wrong, you say, well, it's because this form of government is clearly just incapable of meeting my needs. And that's the part in the book that I really hammer on. It's okay to be mad at politicians. It's okay to want better policy. It's okay to want a more responsive government. But when you're sitting back and saying, you know what, this whole notion of liberal democracy sucks, and maybe we just need a strong man, or maybe my party needs to rule without any interference from, the annoying opposition. Then you've lost the plot at that point.
The hedonic thing is so true. I mean, I can just tell you, like, I'm the son of a prison guard. I know you come from humble roots. It's like the idea that I could get paid to talk to people about politics is absurd. And yet I'm like, Tom Nichols has a lot more Twitter followers than I do. How come I don't have that many? Like, I'm not going to be happy till I get 100,000 Twitter followers. And for you, it's probably like 500,000 now, right? That, like, if you hit 500,000, then you can breathe easy and be happy, right?
Why not 1 million? But it's true, and we know this from research, and we know it's probably hardwired into us because even other mammals exhibit this. We don't measure ourselves by some objective standard of what makes us happy. We measure ourselves compared to other people. And maybe I just have always had a defective gene on that. I've never really negotiated, hard for a salary. People say, here's the salary. And I go, okay, that sounds okay to me. I think I can live on that, instead of saying, well, what does that guy down the hall make? Maybe I lack that entrepreneurial gene. But it does become a problem, again, when you start externalizing that to, why isn't the government solving this problem?
Yeah.
Why do you have that beautiful bookcase and an electric guitar behind you and I don't? And I'll tell you why. It's because you're screwing me somehow, and the government is corrupt and in on it on Matt Lewis's side, and therefore democracy is.
Yeah, that's where I never went, because I'm always like, I don't count on anybody else. I'm going to make it happen. Rugged, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But here's an interesting point you make in the book. I think this is true, but maybe counterintuitive. Is that revolutions or mass movements or whatever you want to call them are not started by people who are exploited or downtrodden, right? It's actually people who are just bored more often than not.
The great social revolutions of the 19th and 20th century, I mean, going back to the 18th century, you do get the poor rising up against the aristocracy in France. But even into the 20th century, the Russian Revolution, the Nazi takeover, rise of fascism. Eric Hoffer in 1951 wrote a lot about this in a book that more people ought to read after they read mine. But that where he points out that a bored middle class is the most dangerous thing there is, because then that group of people goes looking for crusades.
Yeah.
They look for something to give. They're not looking for bread. The Bolshevik motto, bread, land, peace. They have
bread and circuses, which is even older than that. But
they have bread, they have land, they have peace. What they want is meaning and excitement and involvement. And because they don't find that in their lives, they gravitate towards conspiracy theories and, violent mass movements, because then you're not just a guy working in a department store. You're not just a guy changing oil at the local Jiffy Lube. You're not just a woman transcribing medical records all day. You are a hero. You are somebody important. You matter. And that dovetails with the biggest problem that we've had in a free society and a free and affluent society, which is that we've become a narcissistic society.
Yeah. Let me hold on though, because this meaning thing I think is so interesting, right? I wrote about this when we had sort of domestic born jihadists who were like leaving affluent America and going to the Middle East to be terrorists, right? And why would they do that? Like excitement and meaning and purpose. And I don't know, I'm sure you've read Orwell's review. I think it was a review of Mein Kampf, where he says, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, capitalism and even socialism has offered comfort, but Hitler has offered passion and romance. And so people throw themselves at his feet. Isn't it the case that liberal democracy, like maybe if we are to survive, we need to offer a little more danger and romance and excitement?
The problem is, as you left off the other half of that Orwell story, which is that they throw themselves at his feet. And then after several years of misery and pain and torment and defeat, they finally get tired of it. Um, and I
But
think
that's a tough lesson to learn the hard way.
the beauty of liberal democracy, and the reason that we've been around for almost, for 250 going on 300 years or more, go back to revolutionary movements of France and Poland, um, is that we managed to create meaning out of freedom. And what we have now is a bored working and middle class that doesn't see because it doesn't reward them enough at the level that their own narcissistic needs think is important.
Yeah.
And I think on this, I don't want us to have another World War II. But the World War II generation came home and said, we've seen terrible, and this is okay. Where we live now, this is a good thing. And during the Cold War, that was I think part of this is the end of the Cold War, where we always had this reminder. We could look right across the ocean and say, there's a gigantic prison camp spreading over 11 time zones. This is really what it looks like to not be free. And I think people have lost that. The idea that Republicans now, to their eternal and I think indelible shame, embracing Putin's Russia, because they have some notion that it's Christian and white and has order and law, and all, when none of them ever set foot there and know what the hell they're talking about. We've lost that. We don't even think of China that way anymore, because we think of, you say, well, China, communist dictatorship. Yeah, but we buy all our stuff there, and a lot of cool movies are filmed. Yeah, China. I remember China. I saw it in Mission Impossible. I saw it in The Dark Knight Returns.
Isn't this, if you read the Bible, the children of Israel this is the pattern, right? Like, they will become devout, and then over a couple of generations, they become fat and lazy, and then they start worshiping foreign idols. They want a king, and then something bad happens, and they come back to God, right? Or they're taken into captivity, and then they come back to God, and then it happens again, over and over and over.
It's almost like the Bible has eternal truths that are
almost like that, isn't
it? But I think as well, that it is and this isn't to let the wealthy elites off the hook. They've monetized everything. They've commodified everything. There is a symbiosis here. People don't just become fat and lazy simply on their own. They have that lifestyle enabled by people selling them stuff. And one of the mistakes we made going back, I think, all the way back to the 60s, was institutionalizing and permanently instituting a youth culture that then was fused to capitalism that said, you never have to grow up. Life is a party. Everything you want can be yours.
Wait, you're not coming out against denim here, are you? This isn't about blue jeans.
No, this isn't about no. It's listen, I have my own issues with fashion. But I think it's the notion that, you deserve these things. You deserve never to get older. You deserve never to die. You deserve never to feel bad. You deserve never to be inconvenienced. The idea, I was talking about this in when someone was asking me about labor saving devices, because it shows you how different America was back then, that you actually had to convince people to buy washing machines. Because when they first came out, they were marketed as, this makes life easier for the woman. And people, even women, were like, no, hard work for my family is what I do. Yeah. And the washing machine folks were like, wait, what we meant was more time with your family. And then people started buying these because they were trying to market them as, you deserve this, woman of the house. And instead they had to move the marketing toward, this will help you spend more time with your family. You can't sell things like that now. Now it's, of course you deserve a Lincoln Navigator. Of course you deserve an Escalade. Of course
I noticed this with Sarah Palin, who I liked initially, but at some point Sarah Palin started sounding like a 60s radical. Like on college campus talking about the establishment, man, the establishment running the university. They're trying to keep us down. And like, I feel like a lot of the hippie 60s ethos is now on the right. The people who are storming the Capitol are using that the same terminology, the same vibe. It's weird.
I don't trust anybody in authority, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, who do you mean? You? But again, there's that searching for a crusade, even if you have to make one up, to say, this whole thing about the deep state, right? We have to create an enemy that's worthy of our energies. And so it can't just be that it's the deep state and it's pedophiles and it's the Chinese and it's Italian, satellites and it's Jewish space lasers. I mean, it's
don't forget about the Venezuelans and the North Koreans.
Because the idea that you are simply going to vote to get policies that you want, and sometimes you're going to have to live with policies you don't like, and that sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to lose, that is completely alien.
It's like
the Avengers didn't negotiate with Thanos.
If we didn't have the deep state, we'd have to invent it, right?
It's like, Superman doesn't make deals with Lex Luthor. You either win or you lose, and you're the hero, and that gives your life meaning. And then when you're done with your workday that you hate, you go back to your home and you turn on your computer and you jump through the looking glass and you say, I'm important. I matter. I'm a hero.
Well, people need meaning and purpose. And you don't go into it in the book, but like I've talked to David French and a lot of other people about religion, the decline of religion, which might give you meaning and purpose, probably dovetails this. You do compare, though. This is an interesting thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We've replaced religion with religiosity.
Yeah. So
that people who don't go to church nonetheless care very much about whether you say Merry Christmas.
Totally. And here's an interesting comparison you make. And I think maybe you were quoting someone else, but it still struck me as like really interesting. Winning the lottery, right? People who win the lottery usually end up miserable, if not bankrupt. They get divorced. It's the worst thing that happened to them. And that's kind of what being born in a modern America is winning the lottery.
The quote was from somebody I pretty much disagree with about almost everything else, but it was such a great quote I had to use. It was from Andy Basovich, talking about how the age of plenty and the period that we've lived in the past 30 years has created, on this, I think Andy and I both agree that we'd use a word like decadence, that it's created a certain amount of decadence, where, we are like people who've won the lottery. It's interesting you said it. Some years ago, I was working in a bar, one of the many jobs that guys like us have had to work. And I was in a ski lodge, and the woman next to me was telling me she had won, $10 million or something in some big lottery. And I knew the bartender, and I looked over and gave him the, what? And he nodded like, no, she's for real. And what followed for a good 40 minutes was, she said, literally, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. I wish I had never seen $1 of that money. I was married. I was happy. I had, 2 children, lived, I want to say she lived in Pennsylvania, somewhere in Pennsylvania. She basically was like, yeah, this is the most miserable thing that ever happened. I've lost my children, my marriage. We don't talk to each other. And we are kind of like that now. And again, even in that case, you sort of blame the lottery, right? But the things that are happening in America, so much of what's happening is actually within our control. And I think one of the things, Matt, that your point about Palin and the right sounding like the old hippies is this complete sense of victimhood and control, as though, it's always talking about the man, right? Like, I have no power over, and what was I? I was only the governor of an oil-rich state. What could I do?
And it's patently unconservative, right? I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh, and it was all about like, don't expect anyone to hand you anything, man. You got to go out there and make your own success and be entrepreneurial and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and don't listen to what they tell you. You can be successful. You're not a victim. The left preaches victimhood. That's what, like, everything that leads, not everything, but a lot of the things that leads me to reject today's modern right are based on the fact that I used to be part of the right.
Well, when I joined the Republicans in 1978, to me, that was the party that said, Stop whining. Stop waiting for government to solve all your problems. Stop, blaming everybody for your lot in life. Now, I'm just going to say, for the sake of fairness here, a lot of the pull yourself up by your bootstrap stuff was bullshit. That's easier to do. Let's face it, if you're white, or if you have a shot at education, or if you live in the right part of the country. But yeah, the notion that somehow you are just a victim, you are a piece of driftwood floating on the tides is I'm gonna go further than unconservative, Matt. I'm gonna say it's an un-American point of view. Americans have always been the people who say, look, whatever else is wrong with our country, we are the masters of our own destiny. We can change things through elections. We purposely devolve power down to the lowest levels so that we do control our city councils and our school. We're not France, we don't, or Britain, where we have the British Parliament. I always tell my college students, the British Parliament could suspend local government tomorrow and just rule the whole country from London if they really wanted to. That's possible. And they kind of look at me like that. No one could do that. We are empowered. There are things we can do. Money does not always win elections. Hillary Clinton learned that the hard way. Michael Bloomberg learned that the hard way. And yet we, again, because I think we have become entitled, we have become self-centered, we have become detached from the world around us. We think, imagine that we live in 2021 and we can say to each other, unironically, these are the worst times ever. I mean, it's insane that we literally can talk this way and believe it. That doesn't mean there aren't real problems. It doesn't mean that there haven't been failures of government. It doesn't mean that haven't been bad policies that need to be corrected. But the idea that somehow, this whole, I'm underwater on my mortgage, therefore the founders were wrong.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that happens is, skipping a lot of stuff in this book, we're only going to scratch the surface, but I loved, you had a really good chapter about nostalgia. You make a really interesting point about how now we've gotten to the point now where people are nostalgic about times that back then we thought sucked. And you say if each era is a time of decline and then later becomes the good old days, this may say more about irrational nostalgia than about their real living conditions. And I have to say the book is full of pop culture references, some of which I knew and some I didn't. And one I didn't know was, and I think it's a TV show called Tearing Down Tom Riley's Bar.
Tearing Down Tim Riley's
Bar.
That was actually an episode, and I knew from the minute I began writing the book that was going to be in there somewhere. They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar was a segment of Rod Serling's old Night Gallery show.
So wait, Serling was the Twilight Zone guy, right?
The Twilight Zone, right. So the Twilight Zone ends, and in the early 70s, Serling comes back to TV with an anthology show called Night Gallery. And Serling wasn't a big fan of Night Gallery because NBC pushed him to do a lot of ghouls and goblins and vampires. And Serling's the guy who wrote Requiem for a Heavyweight and, Planet of the Apes. And I mean, he was a writer. He did some of the best television in history. He wins an Emmy in 71 for a totally non-supernatural, non-ghoul kind of segment called They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. And it's about a middle-aged guy who is getting forced out of his company. He's a widower. He's a drunk. And he finds out that the bar that he went to, where he met his wife, where he came home from World War II, he used to hang out with his dad, that they're tearing it down. And he keeps going over there and standing around in it. And at the end, they're going to wreck it around him, literally. And it's a little supernatural in that in his mind, are they ghosts or is he imagining them? His father, his dead wife, Tim, the bar owner, they're all reappearing to him. And he's saying, I can't live out there. The world. And remember, this is the world of 1970. This is the thing that everybody thinks is the great time. And Tim Riley and the William Wyndham, the guy in Tim Riley's Bar, is there saying, I can't live in this new world. It's terrible. It's rigged. They crush guys like me. I have no future here. Everything's gone mad.
Yeah.
And I said, you could take all of this and transpose it to 2021 and no one would even know the difference. And I said, the people that talk about how great the 70s were, and how a working man could afford an apartment, here's a whole episode written by a World War II veteran, because Rod Serling was actually a combat veteran of World War II. And the whole episode is about how middle-aged, middle-class white guys are completely screwed by a world that hates them. And I said, does it occur to you that maybe nostalgia is bullshit? The 70s, when Bruce Springsteen, I brought up Bruce Springsteen, but you had it, kids say this to me all the time, because I grew up in the 70s, I went to high school in the 70s. And so when you had it easier in the 70s, like, yes, the 70s, when Bruce Springsteen was singing about the darkness at the edge of town, where men are walking through the factory gates with death in their eyes, where you're taking to the highway on a motorcycle because your town is destroyed and full of cancer and misery and horror. Where Simon and Garfunkel have a hit talking about how there's nothing but the dead and dying back in their hometown. Yes, those were great days. If only we could go back to 1975. And I think, again, we do it because we've become so entitled that we think that somewhere somebody had it so much better than we did. And that if we could only find the culprits who screwed us over, we can get back to that.
I don't know if you saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie.
Great movie.
But
very nostalgic movie.
Yeah, well, the Cy Sperling, that show you mentioned reminded me of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because it's sort of a subtle subplot. But if you watch the movie, Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio are like World War II era guys, and they see all these hippies around, and there is a little bit of that culture clash. And you think about it, like, yeah, if you were born, I don't know, in like the 1920s, you might still be kind of young looking in like 1969 or something, but like your whole worldview would be totally foreign to them.
And you've lived through the Depression. This is another thing, like my dad was born in 1918. I never had nostalgia for my father, the time my father grew up in, because it was the Depression. So, I always thought, well, the 70s sucked, but it's not the 30s. And it's funny you bring up Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because because Tarantino's about my age, and there is a revenge fantasy, right? What really happens in 1969 is that the hippies kind of win, right? And they kill Sharon Tate and they murder the LeBiancos, and they do this reign of terror in Southern California, and everything goes to shit. Whereas in this movie, a couple of 1950s kind of guys, who don't really cotton to any of this, just beat the shit out of the Manson family. And it's like, that's this kind of nostalgia that says, if only we had zigged instead of zagged, we could have made everything okay. And it's what's really pernicious on top of that is it's bad enough when people kind of my age, 60-ish and up, they start having nostalgia where they cherry pick things. I mean, I have nice memories of 1979, even though it's one of the worst years in U.S. history in every possible way. Because I was 18 and I had a car and I had a girlfriend, and, it was great. Right. That's because I
think my nostalgia,
all the other stuff.
I think my nostalgia is even worse, because for me, it's the mid to late 90s, which like empirically were great. And I was young and had a girlfriend and had a car, and so it's going to be tough on me. I assume. But
the worst part of that nostalgia is the young people who are nostalgic for times they never lived through. Right. That is even more pernicious. When people say, well, when a 25-year-old says to me, well, 1980, those were good times, and I'm like, a car loan was 18%, student loans were 14%, and unemployment was 10%. Yeah, man, but you had it easier. It's like, I had it different. It's different. It's not better. It's not worse. It's different. It's different challenges. But this constant, and again, to bring it back to the book, if this is the standard to which you hold a liberal democratic government, then liberal democratic government is always failing, because you're always on a treadmill of remembering the best times in your life. And you're basically saying government should always provide the best times in my life without context or reference to anything.
The title, Our Own Worst Enemy, I assume this is a reference to the Lit song, which is a, I don't know, pop punk band, My Own Worst Enemy. Am I wrong or am I right?
This is where the generational gap between us is becoming painful. Who is Rod Serling, he says. But no, it's a reference. I actually talk about it in the book. It's Pogo, the comic strip Pogo from 1971.
Oh,
where
yeah,
he says,
I've
we have
seen
met
the enemy and he is us. Or that's the one, right?
He is us.
No, but do you know the song I'm talking about? My Own Worst Enemy?
No,
or okay,
I'm too old.
So you have made a pun or a reference to a song, I want to say from the late 90s, early 2000s, a pop punk song that you were not aware of.
Dude, I was 40 in 2000.
Okay, but here's something, and let's shift now to our email questions. Here's one I don't think.
Good.
Here's one, and by the way, I could talk to you about the book for 2 hours. Like I could have been this. We could have done the C-SPAN, interview, but read the book. But somebody emailed and said, like, what is your beef with Led Zeppelin? Why do you hate Led Zeppelin so much?
I don't know. I mean, look, when I was 15 in the dazed and confused 70s. And, my friends would put on Zeppelin. To me, it was just noise. I don't like Robert Plant's voice. I don't like it to this day. I don't like his voice from his. So there is maybe some physical thing where his voice just pings me the wrong way. But I'll say this, and I've talked a lot about this with my buddy Dennis Herring. He's a music producer. Two things to know about my childhood is that I was beaten and put in a burlap sack, which is I missed the blues. So I had no real exposure to the blues until I was well into adulthood. And by then I had formed my musical preferences. So I'm told by professionals that if you don't really appreciate the blues, you're not really going to like Led Zeppelin because it just kind of goes by you.
That explains a lot of their music. But like, what about Fool in the Rain? That dun, 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 dun. You got
I grew up. The other problem is that I grew up in the Connecticut Valley in a working class town, factory town, far from college radio, far from, Boston or even Worcester radio. And mostly our choices were top 40 and pop. So I grew up with a very well-honed pop sensibility. Like I was a Beatles kid. And then I kind of slogged my way through the top 40. And I didn't start developing really different musical tastes until I was in my late teens and suddenly started to embrace new wave and the Cars and the new Britpop invasion and new wave. And so there's a whole part of the musical story. I mean, I didn't really seriously listen to Steely Dan until about 1979 or 1980 as I was catching their last album and then going backwards to, I started with Asia and I ended up going backward to fall in love with Can't Buy a Thrill. It's so funny. I missed, there's a whole blank spot in my musical education there.
You mentioned the Cars, and I only know the hits, but my favorite Cars song is "Who's Gonna Drive You Home," and there's the line. I swear it reminds me of being a political consultant. It's like, "Who's gonna tell you when things aren't so great?" Maybe that ties into the book. You know what I mean? Okay, so that explains why you don't like Led Zeppelin. Why is it? And again, I don't know anything about this. I'm just taking questions from Twitter. I've not vetted these, but why do you hate Indian Americans and Indian food?
Oh, come on. That one's been dispensed with. I have a very provincial New England palate. I don't like spicy food. And so I made this throwaway reference about how Indian food is awful and nobody could possibly like it. And of course, 1 billion people showed up to say, no, 1.2 billion people actually like it a lot. And Preet Barrera took me out for a great dinner. We turned it into a fundraising event. We raised $130,000 for COVID relief in India. And even then, there were still Preet ordered every dish there was. And some stuff I found I really liked. Like I really like biryani. I love lamb biryani now. I'll eat that order me that and I'm good. But even in that dinner, Preet was kind of checking me, and I'd kind of look up and I'd kind of shake him off and say, not this, whatever this is, don't like it. It's a palette of spices that do not appeal to me in general. And I found that with the stuff I liked, like the theory is that my tastes run more towards Central Asia and kind of the west of India and the kind of mountainous regions, biryani and lamb and the roast meats and things like that. I can't deal with curry. I still don't like curries. I still don't like the super spicy stuff. And the reason I said, and we pretend it isn't terrible, is like I'm tired of my fellow academics. Like there's something about academia where they think Indian food is the mark of authenticity. And they would always, anytime I was with a bunch of professors, they'd say, let's go for Indian food. And they would all start like, sweating and they're mopping, they're drinking water. And I'm like, you're trying to convince me that you're having a good time and you look like you're having a stroke.
Now, here's one. I'm not sure if this is someone trolling me or if this is a real reference, but they asked something about a nip slip.
Oh, that, I took a picture in Las Vegas. My wife took a picture of me. I was showing off an article I'd just written back then for USA Today, and I was shirtless by the pool. Okay. And so, older guy, man boobs. This became a thing. So I guess I'm just an old guy sex symbol now to a weird corner of the internet.
I don't have huge pictures of this blown up in my bedroom. That's not a thing.
The internet's a very strange place.
All right. Let's end with some, news of the day kind of stuff. I have to ask you about, Stephanie Grisham. This is the former press secretary who never held a press conference,
right?
Who apparently is now out with a book that some people view as reputation laundering. Other people might say, "Hey, welcome aboard." What's your take on? Do we welcome her as part of the resistance? Or is this shameless reinvention?
Shameless reinvention. Look, I only have one question for all the people writing tell-all books. Who are you going to support in 2024?
But by that definition, I may not be acceptable because I didn't.
Well, you are a little shaky, man. But you're not writing a tell-all book. And you didn't work for Trump. I mean, the people coming out now and saying, first of all, if you really believe the Republic was in that much danger, and this I believe for all of them, from John Bolton to Jim Mattis to the little fish like Stephanie Grisham, you saw things that were outright menaces to national security and to the safety of the Constitution of the United States. You swore an oath as a federal employee to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and yet you kept quiet and kept taking a check. And now that you can make money off of it, now you're letting us know about how deeply, deeply concerned you were. No, bullshit to that. First of all, Grisham's not telling us anything we didn't know already. It turns out we lied at the podium and Fox never called us on it. Well, no shit. What a revelation. But the other is, I'm sorry, all I care about is, did this affect you deeply enough that you will fight against any Trumpist? Are you if you sign on with Nikki Haley in 2024, you're just full of shit. Sorry. I want to see where this goes from a profit-making endeavor to you making a hard decision about what you do with your career. Until then, you're just telling stories of what you saw inside the bathhouse, at the beach, when I'm going into a Eugene O'Neill reference, what you saw with the drunken family at the Connecticut beach that turns out to be a bunch of lunatics, fine. That makes for interesting gossip, but it's not. It doesn't mean anything if you're just going to go right back. You were doing biblical references earlier. If you're going to go back like a dog to its vomit, then what was the point of writing these books in the first place?
Well, saved by grace, but let's see some works. Like if there are if fruit is to come from, I don't know, biblical
And
reference.
harvesting all these stories when, you should have been coming out, quitting the administration, walking out front and saying the country is in danger, the president is mentally unstable. John Bolton saying now, well, I have a book and I'm going to get John, I don't care what's in your book. Where were you? Where were you while Fiona Hill was getting roasted? Where were you while Alex Vindman was ratting out, the plots inside the White House? What? You took the job after all that, and now you want us to read a book and to know how very, very serious and concerned you were. No, sorry.
And as you know, I was praising Vindman and Hill, but the left is insane, and also Biden is.
He's going to film you in a bathroom now for saying that.
Okay, let's go there. What's your take on the activists following Sinema into the, well, not into the stall, but close?
I have been getting people throwing rotten tomatoes at me from the left for a day and a half about this, because I can't, because talking to the right is like talking to an authoritarian doomsday cult. I mean, they're just lunatics. But talking to the left is like talking to sullen children who want the rules to be what they want them to be so they can win the game. And I keep trying to say, if you make it okay to harass elected officials, you are not different from the people who show up at school board meetings or the people who showed up on January 6th. If your operative rule is I can harass an elected official and physically intimidate her because she won't do what I want, you are only different in scale rather than kind from the school board harassers to the January 6th people. It has to, somewhere, somebody has to put their foot down and say, there are things I won't do no matter how mad I am, because I live in a liberal democracy. And I don't care that she didn't talk. She's not a great senator. I get it. I don't think of her as a very serious person. I'm glad she's in the Senate purely because it keeps Mitch McConnell from being majority leader. That's her main job as far as I'm concerned. But to follow her into a bathroom, to follow a woman into a bathroom and film the stall she's in while someone yells at her about how I knocked on doors for you and you owe me. And again, talk about narcissistic and entitled behavior instead of adult behavior. There is now, do I think that the left is as dangerous as the right? No, in no way is the left as dangerous as the right these days. But if they are going to adopt the same permission structure, then it all ends up going down the same dirty drain eventually. Yeah. That once you've made that rule, then you are not defending liberal democracy. You're simply saying, I'm breaking the rules, but I'm doing it in a nicer way because my cause is good. And it doesn't work that way. If a rule is a rule, you observe it even when your opponents don't.
Well, and I think that's one of my big fundamental criticisms of Biden and the Biden era is that I hope that what we were getting is the opposite of Trump, that like this guy was going to be a return to normalcy. The adults are back. He's going to be, a centrist. Things are going to calm down, and I don't really feel like they have. And he could have, like, this bipartisan bill that passed the Senate, that Sinema helped craft, actually. Biden, apparently, I mean, who knows? You can't trust the reporting, but there's reporting that he is, like, kind of rooting on the progressives, pushing this $3.5 trillion bill.
Yeah, I think to somehow say, well, this is now like Trump. To me, Biden is a completely normal president. He wants what he wants. He's got a budget bill. He wants to get it through. He knows it won't go through in the form it's going to go through. He's delegating off a lot of the infighting to members of Congress. That's normal. That's how it's supposed to work. The place I think you can make a better case against Biden is the flurry of executive orders at the beginning, right? To say we're going to get away from, the president being Zeus and throwing thunderbolts. And I think that was, I think he went beyond just reversing the bad stuff Trump did, and he just said, I'm just gonna do this. but I'm going to reject your equivalence here between Biden and Trump. I think Biden is, a pretty normal guy. This is a pretty normal presidency, as normal as it can be when the Republicans have turned into raving freaks.
Trump is definitely a worse person than Biden. What I'm saying is, I was hoping Biden would try to be the opposite, go the complete other direction, and be a return to normalcy. And I think once he got those 2 senators in Georgia, he tried to be FDR and LBJ instead of the anti-Trump. But my real concern with the left,
I think that's a policy decision, not a difference in styles between them. I think, trying for a Hail Mary pass.
The comparison with Trump, I think, has more to do with the left, 1619 Project, CRT, AOC, other acronyms.
I kind of like the fact that Biden is staying out of that stuff, which is what I was hoping he would do. I know that there are people on the right who say, I want Joe Biden to be a centrist and get out there and really go up against AOC and the 1619 Project. I think what Biden's doing, which is basically saying, I'm the president and I'm way too busy for that nonsense, is actually the much smarter approach to it. Biden's busy running the country. He doesn't need to get into the culture wars about, whether the New York Times is too far to the left or whether AOC is, fundamentally wrecking the coalition, or just, that's not a president's job. We have gotten used to a president like Trump wading into the weeds on every stupid thing in the world to generate TV time. And the fact that we don't see Biden on TV every goddamn day, I think is actually a great thing.
All right. Well, how can, again, I could have talked to you about this book for hours, Our Own Worst Enemy, which I do. It reminds me of the Lit song, let's just say. But Tom, how could people, obviously go buy the book, Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. How could people follow you on Twitter and read your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at Radio Free Tom, all one word. And I have moved on from USA Today, but I'm still writing for The Atlantic, and you can still find me out there dropping the occasional pearls of wisdom in various places. So that's how you can find me.
Awesome. That's right. I've seen you at The Atlantic. I didn't know that you totally shifted over, but congratulations. It's a
well, I haven't. I'm doing a whole bunch of things now. I'm about to leave federal service, so I'm kind of readjusting all my life and stuff. So I don't want to say I'm retiring, but I am retiring from the Naval War College. So I'm leaving the military thing behind, and I'm not sure what happens next. And you didn't ask me about Carla the cat. That's partly I'm going to spend more. She was just here a minute ago. I'm going to spend more time hanging out with my cat. So that's the other thing. You can find me and Carla occasionally on Twitter, but there
was a Twitter question about Carla, but no, I didn't know it was the cat. So that explains that. I wasn't going to bring.
Yeah, there are times when I say things like Carla is, eating out of my hand, and people say it's a very strange relationship you have with your wife, and I'm like, no.
Well, great talking to you. Get the book, everybody. Our Own Worst Enemy. Tom Nichols, thank you for coming back on the news.
Thanks, Matt.